Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Professor Hamamoto with you today, and that would be January 21st, 2021, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm so glad to be with you here today. First of all, I wanted to thank all the participants in yesterday's Patreon office hours, and this was the first of hopefully what will be many, many sessions that draw upon your creativity, your insights. We had a group of 6 people total, and every single person stayed to the very end. I would have liked it to go longer. We went almost 2 hours. Originally, it was scheduled for 90 minutes. And I did, by the way, subscribe, thanks to your assistance. I subscribed to a higher level of Zoom, so I was able to extend the session beyond the original 40 minutes. So if that kept you away, this time, don't let it stop you. For the next session, which I will tell you, and hopefully I'll repeat this at the end of this talk today. The next session will be in February, this coming month, next month, which is almost upon us, the first Wednesday of the month, the first Wednesday of February, and that will be at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Remember the time differences, because we had 2 participants in the office hours yesterday from France. And as it turned out, they weren't neighbors, but they were living in the same country, and they had a lot of common interests. And it was just such a delightful surprise. And it doesn't surprise me in that the people that are all gathered here today have a common passion for trying to get at the truth, to understand all the different influences and vectors that are not being covered by, as we know, mainstream media. We won't beat that one to death, or in mainstream academia or any number of sources. But as the intrepid George Webb himself has borne out for almost 5 years now, and through John O'Loughlin's self-study and years of digging and trying to get at the heart of his own personal story, his family story, which intersects with the American story, the American history and world history as well. It has that, holographic, if you will, resonance in our knowledge base there. So we all came together yesterday, and I see this as growing. I think the next session is going to be even larger than the one just yesterday. And for those of you who are not patrons, you're encouraged to enroll in that and subscribe. And this helps in our efforts. And I assure you, you're going to be meeting an interesting group of people. Office hours, I came to realize about 10 minutes or 15 minutes into the session is a misnomer, but I will keep it. I will maintain that trademark, if you will, office hours. It really has more of the characteristics. Our meeting yesterday, our live stream Zoom meeting, and we might be moving. I've been doing some research between now and yesterday. We might be moving from Zoom to another platform, such as StreamYard, given the questionable relationship between Zoom and a foreign entity. Right, I won't go into it any more than that. But really what went on yesterday was not so much office hours, was a seminar. It was a seminar. And by a seminar, I mean people who have done independent work and are exploring different issues that are relevant to their lives and to their wherever they come into the discussion, and they bring it into the seminar room. And then we share amongst each other, and someone here over here on this side asks a pertinent question, and someone here responds to that, and we supply information. And it had that really dynamic and exciting sort of roundabout discussion that was, believe me, I learned a lot. I had to write furiously. I can hardly read my notes, my own handwriting, but I was scrolling down keywords and names that I have to follow up on, because believe me, a lot of the material that was brought to the office hour / seminar is very, very much relevant to my own ongoing research. And speaking of which, I'll be sharing with you another stream here, another thread that you will be adding to, and I'm also drawing upon and adding to the material that other researchers, such as the aforementioned George Webb and John O'Loughlin, just recently, I think a couple of sessions. I mean, the time is flying very quickly right about now. I think it was last week when I sent some material to them that establishes the close connection to the Church of Latter-day Saints and the what we call today as the national security state. So the work that I'm presenting here is an extension of that. It's a deepening of it, but more importantly, it's an opening up of a new, not a new, but an additional area of exploration for you, for those of us who are interested in digging a little bit deeper so that we understand the structure, the architecture of oppression, if you will, and we understand that it's not going to be dismantled overnight, right? It's a giant structure of Legos that have been erected little by little in the guise of just simple play and entertainment. But as it turns out to be, it's a giant wall that's been erected around the Capitol, right? I bet you those little structures that contain people and kept them out as well have a Lego-like play factor to them, right? See how that operates? So anyway, we're going to be talking about the LDS today, and again, I should begin the proceedings today to say this is not a critique, a criticism, or a condemnation of any ethnicity, group, religious entity, church, or any other institution, right? Except the largest institution of all, and that is of the Luciferian underground that seems to be behind this. When you kick down the wall, it always seems to come to the Dark Prince there. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. And if I can manage to overcome my tendency to over-explanation, if time permits, I will conclude with where I left off with the detective fiction, the spy fiction more specifically. I know I was going to do it at the top here, but I want to take some time with this book that I just came across here, and I don't want to cut it off at the end. So I'll do it the other way around. If I can more easily and readily and with in good faith and a good conscience cut off the spy fiction area, which, by the way, also dovetails very, very closely into the nonfiction world of religious institutions, as we'll talk about. See how this all fits together as kind of a organic Lego, right? We don't need Lego. We have our minds, we have our intelligence. We have something called analogical thinking in a digital. I know they're trying to convert us all to digital, but our biggest weapon, our biggest defense against that is analogical thinking, right? And I happen to excel at that. And that's not what I'm telling you, or I'm not bragging about. That's what the people who continually tested us from K through 12 through, all the way through even postgraduate school. You're taking tests and tests. I hope I've taken my last standardized test ever. I still have nightmares about number 2 pencils and filling in little bubbles or missing an examination. But we were tested relentlessly, probably from kindergarten, maybe from first grade. Really started around 3rd and 4th grade. They really started clamping down. I think they wanted to, they meaning the interested agencies, wanted to identify early upstream which of the children had a certain skill set that might be needed for either corporation, the military, or perhaps the clergy. I don't know who was getting this information, But we see this in the rise. I'm sort of straying from the topic here, but I'm getting back to it because what we're really talking about is intelligence, not just IQ intelligence, but political intelligence, spying, spycraft. Right? It takes a certain type of person, certain type of profile to execute the tasks. So the point is that I'm trying to make is that I excelled in these standardized exam tests in one particular area, and that's Miller's analogies. Miller's, I don't even know if they even do that, right? That's where you're supposed to compare fruit to chaff, whatever it might be, right? And what it does is it doesn't measure native intelligence. What it does is measure your cultural competence and how far advanced are you and able to make these sort of connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena. And that's really what is valued in all the professions, really, until recently. Analogical thinking in the law and medicine and all that's kind of going out now. It's being pushed out by the digital, the AI and all of that. So the analogical, the creative aspect of the human mind is being truncated through so-called neuroscience. And that's another talk altogether. But I just am trying to present to you that the people I met yesterday had that gift. And so do you if you're watching this, right? You're not playing video games and you're not totally lost to the AI world yet. And you'll be a holdout against it. And you are our best defense against the AI digital oppression. I mean, after all, wasn't it IT that took down American democracy on the previous election, right? E is an electronic. Yeah, that's what happened. But I'm telling you, we've got analogical insight. Go analog whenever you can. All right. Okay, let me. So thank you very much for supporting the effort yesterday on Zoom with the Patreon people, and everybody's welcome to the party. Okay, let us start with the Church of the Latter-day Saints. Most of us, myself included, have a very, very cartoonish understanding of what the Latter-day Saints represent, or I'll use the colloquial term Mormons, if that's okay with you, just for the sake of convenience. The Church of Latter-day Saints is their formal institutional name, but most people know them as the Mormons, and I don't think they take offense to it, but I'll use the term nonetheless. And the history, formally and colloquially in the popular publications, it's been written about extensively. So I'm not going to go down that path today. You can do it on your own, and some of you probably know a lot more about the church history than I do. And you know about certain controversies that have arisen and certain what people consider to be quirks in their theology. And believe me, I've participated in these sort of casual discussions, when in truth knowing very little about it except what I saw and heard, just like everybody else on TV, in movies, and in magazines. But I didn't really study it seriously. I took it seriously, but I never really got a chance to explore it like I'm now beginning to. And I'm not a newbie in that area, by the way. I'll explain to you how I came to this particular point. It actually started years ago. So I have been to the Mormon Tabernacle in Hawaii. It's elaborate, and that was my first real glimpse at the regalia. And I don't mean this in a negative sense, but the spectacle of the because I've been to Catholic Church. Talk about spectacle. I've been to St. Peter's Cathedral. I've seen Leonardo da Vinci. I've been there. I've been to the to all the great not all of them, to many of the great shrines, not just in the Christian world, but also masjids, Buddhist temples, and I'm fascinated by them. Some of it's a practical use of churches in particular, because whenever I'm traveling, I find them a really good place to get out of the hot sun and just kind of collect myself and find a quiet space. There's no one yelling around there. And it's usually kind of cool, and it could be blazing hot outside, but these stone churches that go back to the 16th century are just really nice little way stations, if you will, to just kind of relax while I'm being a tourist. And same with the masjids or the temples; they're always full of people with right intention, with peace on their minds. At least from what I can tell, I feel very at home there, even though I'm not necessarily of that religious faith. And I think that's a very important strategy, if you will, for our own survival today in 2021 here in the United States of America. And maybe you'll see me in a church or a temple or someplace, just kind of sitting in the back and thinking quietly to myself about the fate of the world and what I'm planning to do in order to help right the ship of state that is listing to the left as of the recent, yesterday, in fact, the inauguration of our illegitimate president and the vice president. I didn't say that. You didn't hear that word, illegitimate. So we're, and I'm guilty of being just superficially acquainted with LDS, all the caricatures. Some of them are even freakish portrayals of LDS. And yes, I read the National Enquirer and I go through the articles, or I look on YouTube and read about, I can't remember her name, and I don't mean to make light of her predicament, but there was a girl or a teenager that was found that had been held captive by some splinter group of the LDS. I think the LDS church repudiated, or just denied any relationship to this fellow, but this family had apparently been a splinter group. And it was a sensational story in this day and age, but the point is that that's the type of portrayals that are put out there in the popular media. And now that I think about it, I think a lot of that is done on purpose to obscure the deeper, darker, if you will, activities of not just the LDS, but all religious institutions. And it seems like every single one of them, with a few exceptions, start out with the greatest of intentions, but there must be something to do with institutionalization in itself, where corruption begins to seep in. And before you know it, corruption is synonymous with these particular institutions, right? The LDS being only one of them. Excuse me, something popped up on my screen that I had to get rid of. So we have these sort of characters, these cartoons. Some of us may know about their work as missionaries. For the longest time, I was always mystified by these well-dressed, they were usually male. Seemed like they were teenagers, maybe early 20s, and they always wore white dress shirts with a black tie, usually short sleeve and black pants. And I would see them pedaling down the street on 10-speed bicycles. And later on, they were riding trail bikes or mountain bikes instead of 10 speeds. I guess they're more durable. And I didn't know what they did. I just said, well, they must be involved in some sort of a recruitment or a proselytization of some group. But I didn't really associate it with Mormonism until I learned that part of the requirement, Mormons of a certain age have to go through a 2, 3, 4, I don't know how long it is exactly, mission is part of their training, their initiation to the faith, or their instruction, their religious instruction, to go out there and to expose others to the word of their scriptures and their thinkers and their church representatives. And that's an important point in the story that I'm going to be getting into, because it seems that the LDS was, its real growth has been dependent upon overseas proselytization and overseas growth. And that was really how they formed their modern power base. Now, you can see immediately, because you're all who are watching this are really skilled in the art of analogical thinking, right? Miller's analogies. You can immediately infer from what I've said so far that overseas missionaries are really good intelligence assets, are they not? Yes, because before they even go over there, they have to receive rigorous language instruction as it is articulated in the society and culture where they are going to be visiting. So let's say if they're going to Japan, they're studying Japanese language and writing, and many of them get really good at it. And some of them become such great speakers of Japanese that they will be elevated. They'll be part of the Japanese popular culture. There was this one guy named, I can't remember. I was in Japan so many years ago, and he's probably still around there. But he was an American, a Mormon church. I think his name's Kent Gilbert. Kent Gilbert. He became a celebrity, and he became sort of the face of study English language. Be like a Kent Gilbert, and he was a very wholesome, all-American-looking boy, and very harmless and friendly. And people like that, are accepted because he knows and he appreciates and he values the culture and the language. He took the time to study it seriously, not just so he could, I'm not putting this down, but not just so he can understand anime and get into Pokemon and read the manga. And again, that's fine. I do it too. I mean, I see that as important cultural expressions, and I take it seriously. Now, these people were interested in advancing. People like Kent Gilbert are interested in advancing the agenda, the goals of his parent religion. And I'm sure that there's a Kent Gilbert in any number of countries all over the world, right? And I'm not implying that he's an intelligence asset or an agent. I'm just saying that the overseas missionary model is very successful. It's practical, but it is not neutral. It's just not politically neutral. It has a purpose behind it, and it does not always bode well for just everyday people, whether in Japan or other countries, or for those of us here in the United States of America, or in Germany, as I'll get into in a moment. It could have disastrous consequences for the native population, and I'm not excusing it. I'm not being an apologist for Vladimir Putin or his associates or his government, but they are suspicious of foreign proselytizers. They're quite because they saw what the Bolsheviks did in subverting traditional Russian society and its political structures, whatever problems or good points they had. I'm not going to get into that, but they can see how overseas foreign takeovers can be executed through seemingly innocuous strategies. And those of you who are watching this, who are expert in analogical thinking, you're already ahead of me. You're seeing that this is probably what's happened to the United States of America, not through the Mormon Church necessarily, but other seemingly innocuous cultural or religious institutions. It's a great cover all the way around. And I'm only talking about LDS now because it seems to fit into this larger pattern. But let me finish up with Putin. Putin has said, Latter-day Saints, you're not welcome here. And I think there was even legislation that was put through to ban them as an official organization. I don't know if they been put on as some sort of undesirable political entity or not, but they're not welcome there. Let's just say that, right? And they have the LDS has met resistance wherever they have gone, not just overseas, but also in the U.S. Some of you know about the so-called Mormon Wars in the 19th century, and some really violent encounters between the church members of the LDS and others who are their opponents, and they're not averse to defending themselves. For example, I saw a documentary about LDS compounds in Mexico, Estados Unidos de Mexico. They're Mexican citizens, but and born there, but they have an LDS enclave and business connections there. And by the way, the Romney family has connections to Mexico in that way. I think George Romney was born in Mexico, and he had a pretty solid career as an elected official. And we know more recently about Mitt Romney. And we're not going to hold his religion against him. We are going to hold him to the standard of what's good for America. Whatever you bring to the republic, that's how we judge our political leaders. And yeah, Joe Biden is Roman Catholic. He professes that, and we're not going to blame Roman Catholicism for Joe Biden. That's just one of the markers that we look at when we're looking at or discussing these characters or history. So let me talk about how I came to the realization that the Mormon Church was more than just a religious institution. Well, I've been involved with the study of the New World Order. I've been developing New World Order theory for many, many years. And at an earlier stage, years ago, I was interested in Howard Hughes because I had known, even before I knew anything about the so-called deep state or about Watergate or the Kennedy assassination. This is probably because I grew up in the Los Angeles, Orange County area, and Hughes was big in Southern California. He employed thousands, maybe tens of thousands, mostly of men in the post-war boom, the 1950s, with Hughes aircraft, for example. I had a lot of friends who worked at their dads, who were engineers or technicians or whatever, who worked for one of the divisions, right? There was a huge Hughes aircraft, I don't know if it was aircraft, it might have been Hughes Aerospace by this time, up in Fullerton, California, which this is in Orange County, California, which is right next to Los Angeles County. So my life was permeated, my childhood was permeated by an awareness about Howard Hughes. And my dad was always interested in these business characters. And he would always kind of, this is before the internet, he was like my website. And he would always be breaking down, well, so-and-so is this and this and this, and here's how. I think he had delusions of being a millionaire one day. So he looked up to these people and read up as much as he could to make himself into these, as bizarre as that may sound, to try to aspire to them. He looked up to these individuals. So that's how I found out about Howard Hughes initially as a child. But then I learned about Howard Hughes and his relationship to not just the FBI, but the CIA. Much later, when I read an autobiography of one Robert Mayhew, that's spelled Maheu. And if you've been following the readings of John O'Loughlin, and it's now called Macduff Lives, right? That's the name of his channel now. It's what used to be Macduff_20. Now it's Macduff Lives, if you want to check it out, and you should. And it comes on an hour after the show ends here on YouTube. His name comes up often because he is of the same cohort as John O'Loughlin's father, Thomas O'Loughlin. And who knows, they might have crossed paths. They might have known each other. I don't think they worked on, these are huge institutions, even the FBI. So you can go through your whole career without crossing paths with some of these people. But beyond that, Robert Mayhew over the years has his name and his contribution, for better or worse, has been remarked upon by many journalists and by historians who've written about the 60s and the 70s, the deep state as it's now known, correct? So that name was familiar to me when, by the time I came across the book, and I found out, I already knew this, but I got the details, the inside skinny, the smut on the right-hand man of one Howard Hughes, and that was Robert Mayhew, who also, and if you already know this, I'll be brief, but his background, Roman Catholic, I think he went to Jesuit colleges, Holy Cross. I don't, quote me on this. I'm just going from memory here. But he has that background. And he was brought into the FBI, and he was probably sheep-dipped many times over, right, or seconded to the CIA. He was one of those those individuals who were, World War II veteran, combat veteran as well, who had been around. He knew his way around, and he was a rough and tumble individual, like most of the men of that generation, including my father. He wasn't a spook. My dad was a hard ass, like all these guys at the time. That's just who they were, right? So he was Howard Hughes's right hand man, and you know that Howard Hughes ostensibly made his fortune in oil engineering. It was actually his father who had brought Howard into the job, and his father was the inventor genius and entrepreneur that gave well, he wasn't a junior, but he gave his son a head start in life. So that was his primary contribution. And of course, he's a pioneer in aviation and aeronautics. He conceived of and had built what's called the spruce goose. It was made almost entirely out of wood, right? Spruce. That's why they call it the spruce goose. I don't think it's flown in many, many years. I don't think it's even capable of it, but I think it's right by the Queen Mary down in Long Beach or San Pedro. It's a tourist attraction now, down in the Los Angeles area, not far from the Hughes Empire Central, right? So you can go check it out. I've seen. I haven't been on. I didn't want to pay to go on it, but I this many years ago. I did go on the Queen Mary though. So that's his. But he's also known, in addition to being this industrialist, this legendary inventor and adventurer, he was also a Hollywood movie mogul, right? That was where the action was. And I think in that he was following not consciously, but there are other people who were involved in this pageantry of intrigue, such as Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., who preceded Howard Hughes. Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. was more like Howard Hughes's father's generation. So he was there in the silent era, trying to pick through Hollywood and finding mistresses and lovers, and as well as great investment opportunities amongst primarily immigrant Jews, who he referred to, these guys are a bunch of nothing but pants pressers. This is in the old days of the hand laundries, right? So I could outdo them in business, easy as pie, right? So that's Joseph P. Kennedy, right, Sr. So Howard Hughes followed that pattern. He was a ladies' man. I remember I've read a couple of biographies of Howard Hughes himself, and he had such legendary lovers as Katharine Hepburn. Yeah, I don't think she had, she had a longstanding love affair with Spencer Tracy. Some of these names might not mean anything to you, but they were from the golden age of Hollywood, so-called, the 40s up until maybe the early 50s, the late 30s through 40s. So the war kind of stopped it, right? It just, everything kind of ground to a halt there. But that moment in time when you have these bigger than life individuals, Spencer Tracy and Katharine, but that was one of his amours, let's say, Katharine Hepburn, and they even took a cross-country flight. I think it might have been in the Spruce Goose. It was just Howard Hughes and Katharine Hepburn, just the two of them. How romantic is that? Of course, they couldn't go nonstop. They had to stop off at different airports at the time. And so he was a great navigator. He must have been. And then, of course, his relationship with Jane Russell, the actress, is legendary. You can look that up on yourself. He produced a movie for her. He also produced the film about the Sopwith Camels, right? The aces of World War I, because he was an aviator. He was fascinating. And then not him, but the director helped orchestrate the person behind the scenes, the camera people, help orchestrate one of the classic air battles before that one. I mean, that was a spectacular visual experience for the film goers of the day. That was Howard Hughes. And also his relationship to Hollywood and later Las Vegas was shored up by the fact that he purchased RKO Pictures. And this is apocryphal, but it rings true given what I know about Howard Hughes. The story goes is that Howard Hughes was an insomniac. That much is true. He had a lot of health problems. He was into pills and all kinds of medication regimens that would boggle the mind even today. But he was an insomniac, and when he moved to Las Vegas, which I'll get to in a moment, he found that unlike in LA, he couldn't see anything past 8 o'clock in the evening. So he bought the studio. He bought into the studio so he can look at all the old catalog of RKO as well as other movies anytime he wanted to. This is before cable television. This is just terrestrial television. And he bought a station, a local station there that would broadcast that so he could watch his favorite films and popular news, whatever else that was being broadcast at the time. So he was a visionary. He was probably, he was the first guy to think of a 24-hour media cycle, which today we take for granted. But even when I was a kid, it was typical for all broadcasting to cease by about 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and there was nothing until the next morning. 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, something, and cartoons, right? And the news, which I hate. I love the cartoons, but I just hated the news. So that's Howard Hughes. Just as an aside, Leonardo DiCaprio starred in a biopic on Hughes. It was called The Aviator. It was released in 2004. I'm just telling you this to show you the importance of Howard Hughes in American popular culture, as well as in the history and in intelligence history, right? And years later, this is really interesting. I'm going to go back and watch this film again. Years later, years earlier by a factor of almost 20 years. This is in 1980. Jonathan Demme is one of my favorite directors of all time, past or present. He's the guy, by the way, who directed Silence of the Lamb. He's directed a lot of really good music documentaries. They're not they're like capturing musical performances, and most people don't really get it right, but Jonathan Demme has a really good feel for music, and he's done a lot more than that, but for our purposes here, he directed this great comedy of all things, Melvin and Howard, released in 1980. I don't know if it's available on Netflix. If not, you'll have to buy them, pick it up somewhere. And it started Paul Le Mat, and Paul Le Mat, for those of you who are into George Lucas in American Graffiti, where he made his debut. He's a graduate, by the way, of UCLA Film School. Francis Ford Coppola, I think, George Lucas came out of USC. Francis Ford Coppola came out of UCLA on the other side of town. So that was George Lucas's first big-time film, American Graffiti. And Paul Le Mat was the guy who drove that hot rod out, up and down the street. I guess it was in Stockton, and we haven't heard much from him, Paul Le Mat, after that. I thought he was a good actor, that film was good enough to win the Academy Award for Mary Steenburgen. Wow! So it probably should have won for best film, but it was kind of quirky and weird. But as early as 1980, Jonathan Demme had figured out that the mythos of Howard Hughes was going to loom ever larger. It was already big by 1980, but he's almost synonymous with the deep state, right? Howard Hughes today. So I alluded earlier to Howard Hughes's move down to. I'll get into the LDS and Nazi Germany soon. I'm sorry, I have to go through Howard Hughes first, and be patient for 2 more minutes. Howard Hughes moved to Las Vegas from LA, and he famously started buying up all the properties in Las Vegas. And as you know now, in 2020-21, Las Vegas not only is mobbed up, but it's also one of the important locations for the alphabet agencies, right? Not just of the U.S., but maybe even Saudi intelligence. And I'm sure, the intelligence agencies from all over the world go there in order to, well, you know what they do at gambling casino. A lot of it has to do with money laundering, right? In exchange of illicit funding of various capers and projects that they're involved with. So Howard, that's another reason why Howard Hughes is important here. I think early on he was sent there or went down there as sort of the point man for the so-called deep state, the intelligence agents, to set up shop and to collaborate with such famous gangsters as Mo Dalitz. And I think Dalitz comes out of Chicago. I think he was an associate of the Capone gang. I might be wrong. I think he was Midwestern. He's definitely not one of the five families of New York and New Jersey. I think he was Midwestern. He might have been Purple Gang, but I think he was Chicago, like Lou Wasserman. People like Lou Wasserman was big, Music Corporation of America. Dr. Jules Stein, the ophthalmologist, who comes out of Chicago and the gangland Chicago. And I mentioned him earlier. Mo Dalitz was in that orbit. And Howard Hughes was, after a 10-day stay at the Desert Inn, was told, hey, it's New Year's Eve. We got all these celebrities coming in, probably the Rat Pack, Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, all the guys. So you got to leave, you got to vacate that suite up there. And so Hughes said, oh, man, I don't want to move. So he wound up buying the Desert Inn for $13 million. Then he started buying up other hotels and other casinos. And now that I think about it, I don't think it was with his own money. I think it was using OPM, which stands for other people's money. And I think the other people's had alphabets as acronyms that you and I well know by now. All right. So that's Howard Hughes. And his, I forgot the most important part of the story. The film by Jonathan Demme, Melvin and Howard, the premise was that there was a gas station. This is a true story, but it's based on a true story. This is not a fabrication of a screenwriter. Not like the drama that was fabricated on the Capitol. It was just really nicely scripted. This is a true story, based on a true story about a gas station owner who was a member of the LDS. His name is Melvin Dumar. He was a Utah service station owner, and he rescued Howard Hughes. I think Howard Hughes' car broke down in the desert, and Utah's right, not that far, Salt Lake City. You can get to Las Vegas, where he was living already, Howard Hughes. And he was, and Melvin Dumar is a gas station. And gas stations back there used to do mechanical work too. In case you think that's strange, that was part of their purpose, their function. And he helped Howard Hughes get his vehicle back together, and presumably he made his way back to the Desert Inn, whatever hotel he was staying at or owned down in Las Vegas. And then, lo and behold, one day an envelope shows up in the hands of Melvin Dumar, and he he finds out that he's the beneficiary of a $156 million will bequeathed to him by Howard Hughes. So that became a huge court case and a battle, and there was all these, I won't go into the deep story, but there's all these accusations of forgery and fakery and misrepresentation. But the key here is that the battle, the document, the supposed Hughes will worth $156 million was allegedly found in the headquarters of the Church of Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City, which I visited. It's an impressive structure, and that's where they have all the genealogical office and whatnot. I'm sure they're much more sophisticated, even more so today than when I was there 20 years ago or so. So so that's the connection to the deep state, the pre-connection. Let me go more specifically into this book, which was a revelation. It's called Moroni and the Swastika, subtitled Mormons in Nazi Germany, written by David Conley Nelson, right? And thank you to my Patreon subscribers. You allow me to pick up books like this, purchase them, and sift through them. Let me just talk to you a little bit about David Conley Nelson, just to give you an idea of his bona fides. He is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and probably after he retired, or maybe during service, he enrolled in a doctoral program at Texas A&M. And I don't know if it's what department it was, in history. Yeah, I guess it's in the history department, Texas A&M. He was 6 years an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps. He was not a career officer, so he went into the academic world after that, I guess. Or he probably became a commercial airline pilot. I'm sure he'd be very much versed in the life of Howard Hughes, being a legendary engineer and avionics pioneer himself. So he's listed as an independent researcher. However, this is published by the University of Oklahoma Press. This is an academic piece of work. And I mention that because a lot of the literature before this book that I had come across were written by, frankly speaking, disgruntled, this is their word they use, apostates. That is, people who have left the faith, right? So they have an axe to grind. And if you read, their material is useful, but you realize that they have an agenda here. This author here, Conley, or Nelson, has less of an agenda. He doesn't have any personal animus that I could tell. And I didn't, I haven't gone through this book chapter, line, and verse. I don't know if he was an LDS member or not. That's an important piece of information to know when reading a book like this. But he doesn't seem to have an agenda or any particular animus towards the LDS. Like a lot of people who talk, oh yeah, the Vatican, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they were in bed with the Nazis. And yeah, we know that. We know it. So don't put that in the comments, by the way. Number one, I already know it. Been there, done that. You're not going to teach me anything new. And third, it really is irrelevant, But so if you get off parading your superior knowledge of this, do it somewhere else, because it doesn't interest me. Not that I know everything. It's just that this is not your forum. This is the forum for people who want to comment on the material that's being presented here, not for you displaying your ego. And I'm saying this because I think I'm being hit by trolls who are putting a bunch of garbage on that and keeping sane and conscious and analogically gifted people from watching these videos and commenting on them. So I'm blocking those comments. That's what I'm doing, because it's a distraction, and you know it. So anyway, this is his bona fides, and I think with the time remaining, I will have to cut to the chase here, because as I'm reading this book, what I'm thinking is what is the role of contemporary, that is right now, religious institutions in the United States of America as we see this medical martial law, quote unquote, as it's been called. I don't use that phrase because martial law is martial law. Medical martial law, it's a nice little rhetorical flourish, but it really doesn't mean anything. And I'm cutting fine points here because we found that all the people who are creating phrases and memes like "stop the steal," that's not politics. Those are just meme making and phrase mongering. And it's been a distraction, just like Dr. Steve Pachanik, just like QAnon, it has been a distraction. It sounds great when you utter them, and it shows that you know the shibboleth, the password, and you're in this little in-group that supposedly has a higher level of awareness and perhaps even intelligence than most other people, right? Especially the so-called libtards, right? Because we're also engaged in a lot of labeling and name calling. So we're going to cut that out from hereafter. Keep it. And by the way, I'm guilty of that as well. I have been in casual conversation or in correspondence, but I'm going to keep that to a minimum. That's my pledge to you in my improvisations here, in my talks here, my monologues. I'm not going to do any noodling or playing you little snippets of little pop tunes, right, that everybody can recognize and enjoy, but don't really add anything to the discussion. So that's my pledge. So the main takeaway point that I'm getting, and this wasn't the intention of the author, but the takeaway point I have here is that the churches, the established churches, have been so thoroughly compromised in the United States of America and perhaps other countries that we are not going to be able to rely upon traditional institutions of a refuge or sanctuary from the secular world, from the governments, right? They're 501c or corporation or nonprofit organizations typically, right? So they have tax benefits, but in tax advantages, tax avoidance advantages in exchange for their silence, which means complicity to whatever government edicts and policies are being handed down. So they are not really in line with the words of Jesus, of the Nazareth Jesus, right? Who in Mark, I believe, talked about, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. They're rendering us unto Caesar. They are delivering us whole hog. And I'm putting out this warning because a lot of us who are in a very, very vulnerable state right now are going to be running toward religious institutions for solace, right? For guidance, maybe even for material assistance in getting through this really hard time that we're entering into. And I'm not telling what to do, but I'm just raising a warning, drawn from the lessons of history, how even religious institutions can be compromised. Because I know a lot of people were so shocked that the Supreme Court of the United States is a politicized institution. You thought that, and so did I at one point. I lost my religion in belief in the Supreme Court a long time ago with the internment of Japanese Americans in World War II. That was validated by the U.S. Supreme Court, and they've been on the wrong side of history many times that I can recount. So, we don't. Oh, Joe Biden, the president, the election was stolen. Elections have been, and I don't mean to excuse the miscreants who pulled us off this recent caper, but that is part of American the electoral process is election theft. It's just the boldness and brashness and the openness and the arrogance and the unmitigated criminality and the gloating that we saw on these perpetrators that really it sticks in my craw as well. And one of the chief perpetrator dares attend the illegitimate inauguration dressed in royal purple. You know who I'm talking about, right? Okay. I'm running out of time. So let me just explain very briefly historically, how did because I didn't know, how did Mormons even get to Germany? And apparently they had a presence, so the LDS has had a presence in Germany as early as around 1840. And this is long before the Weimar, well, not super long, but long enough before the Weimar Republic came to an end with the ascension of one Adolf Hitler. I think it was in 1933. The Weimar Republic was the regime, the government that preceded Hitler, and Hitler threw that overboard, right? And again, it's a lesson to us how a liberal government can be taken over fairly quickly, again, by outside influences, primarily bankers, and turn it over to a dictator. But anyway, they were there prior to that, the LDS in 1840. And some of it had to do with the fact that there were earlier German immigrants to the U.S., German Americans who had gone there, still had some language ability, and were able to renew family ties and establish a fairly strong presence by the time of the Weimar Republic, and certainly by the time that Adolf Hitler became the supreme ruler of Alemania, or Germania, right? Now, what's interesting here for our purposes, and again, this is in keeping with my warning about misplaced trust in organized religious institutions, because we've seen them betray at minimum, but even shepherd their flock into the jaws of evil time and time again. But it was the Mormon Church, according to this book, this historical scholarly book, very well written, incredibly thoroughly well researched by Dr. Connolly Nelson, right? We see their close complicity with the Third Reich, and we see and I'm not implying that they're going to equally be complicit with what we're seeing here, the Fourth Reich here in the USA, but I trust history. I look at patterns and I see behavior. I don't go by memes and little slogans, little advertising jingles, and little fops. Like your Gavin McGinnis or something. He's not even an American citizen, right? He's a Canadian subject, who, by the way, is the founder of Proud Boys. And then when the Proud Boys does their thing and are set up, he's gone. He's gone. He's disappeared. He started all these publications, and his father-in-law, I think, has some kind of connection with some sort of intelligence operation in the guise of a neuroscience outfit. So let's forget about these Pechenik type people. Let's not be. See, this is now, his name is now an adjective. Let's not allow ourselves to be Pecheniked anymore. All right. It's galling to have these low-level operatives who think they're high-level, but they're low-level human beings. Let's call them like a Steve Pechenik, Dr. Steve Pechenik, who likes to tell us on Alex Jones for the past 19 years. Gavin McGinnis is also a frequent guest. I think he's being brought back now to be rehabilitated and run another ops on us. Let's not allow these people to have a big giant laugh at our expense again. All right, let's be cautious about that. So we'll be returning to books like this continually in these talks. And before I end, because we're coming to an end here, I will say that I will remove any excuse that might be lingering in your mind about having to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's by playing along with evil, with governments that are responsible for mass extermination and genocide, and have built science, both hard science and social science, aided and abetted by the United States, right? The experts, Madison Grant, all the great eugenicists of America, that was all transported over to Hitlerian Germany, right? Let us not fall into the trap of saying that the LDS had to do what it had to do. It had to accommodate itself to political realities, because as Dr. David Connolly Nelson himself articulates in his brilliant closing statements here, he says that other churches were not compliant, right? Some of them were persecuted, but they did not comply, not like the LDS. And there's a whole section, if you want to cut to a very simple primer in the complicity of LDS and Nazi Germany, just go to the photograph section here. And by the way, the Patreons who are subscribers got an excerpt of this so you can see graphically what I'm talking about here. But look at here, and you will see visually, don't just depend on the words or my account, how the LDS turned their Boy Scout troops into Hitler Youth units, because the Nazi administration said, Boy Scouts, that's Anglo-American, that's British, that's American, it's out. Take the badges off, and now you are Hitler Jugends, right? That's just one trivial example, perhaps, but it's just indicative of the complicity. So you cannot hide behind this excuse. Well, we had to just survive and live to fight another day. So, because this book here says that the Christian scientists were stood in opposition to the Third Reich authorities, but even more admirably, and I don't know if this holds true today in 2021, right? I'm always skeptical, as I stated earlier, about any religious established institution. But at this time, under the Nazi regime, the Jehovah's Witnesses come out quite well. A lot of their membership were sent to, I think most of their membership were sent to concentration camps. And those of them who, prior to the concentration camp incarceration, had to walk around with purple triangles sewn on their clothing so that the other citizens or other people can see and and despise them for being members of the reviled Jehovah's Witnesses, right? Yeah, so they pursued an entirely different path than the LDS, the Jehovah's Witnesses. There's still a strong. He brings it up. The author brings it up to date here, and to talk about the current membership of Jehovah's Witnesses in current modern day Germany. They have 4 times as many members, Jehovah's Witnesses does, than the Church of Latter-day Saints. I wonder why. I think because the people know the history there. It's 4 o'clock. I didn't even get to talk about how the Mormon missionaries went through Weimar Republic, which is synonymous with depravity and all kinds of moral transgression. How these people who live so cleanly, no tobacco, no alcohol, how they managed to navigate Weimar Germany, places like Berlin, which is full of just, prostitution and these crazy sex scenes, bars, cabarets, all of it, right? It's been well documented. Maybe I'll go into that later if I have time. But anyway, I hope I have done my job today in today's talk to issue a warning about our susceptibility, our vulnerability to go back into the comfortable, seemingly secure arms of the church, whatever church it might be, because you might find yourself being marched off into a fusion center or a gulag or some sort of abandoned sports stadium, or being told to shelter in place in your home, your apartment, for the rest of our lives. Maybe this is the gulag that we're in. So, something to discuss, something to think about. Do so in the chat. We can talk about it at next month's Patreon office hours. But this is a discussion that we, the American people, and people all over the world, have to have. And that's why I call today's talk Church and State. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being with me here today. And I'll see you in about an hour for the Thursday trio with the one and only George Webb and John O'Loughlin, who is the host of the program. And I'm going to see if I can pry some information from George Webb about his operation plan moving into 2021 and beyond, right? Is it true that there might be a regular show that's going to expand, that's in formation right now? That's what was rumored in the office hours yesterday on Zoom. So maybe I'll pick his brains and see what George has in store for us. So thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you in a bit. Thank you very much. Bye.